When we first reached out to these potentially new allies, we worried what was going to happen. We knew that this species was pretty much incapable of stopping its arguments, stopping its fighting, stopping its killing. But this is also exactly what we needed. Those who reach out from the darkness had finally found us, no matter how quiet we remained, and now they were starting to move across our entire area. Our territory was being taken over planet by them. Ruthlessly efficient they were, taking over entire colonies, entire satellites, entire sectors were falling, and it was incredibly quick. So quick, in fact, that we did not even realize what was going on until two entire sectors were taken down. Two entire star systems gone. Several million gone before we even knew what was going on. We only had a slight understanding of why they did this. Apparently, it was some sort of destiny that was manifest to them. Anything that they found was theirs, and they claimed it by right of conquest. Though no one ever can truly argue with right of conquest, it was still something we could not deal with, as we realized that if our people were not being taken as simple food, then they were being taken as slaves. And in some cases, as we have known from our own path, this can be a fate worse than death itself. So we needed to fight back, but we are not a warrior race. We are engineers, we are scientists, we are peaceful people. We do not know how to fight like that. So we could only reach out to the one species we knew that was very efficient at killing. A species known as human. When we first reached out, it was for desperation. We had known about them for several dozen of their own decades, as they had sent out a double pulse across the stars, letting us know that they were available. They also sent out many messages in many different directions. However, we found out that they could not quite reach far enough to reach the unknown, those that we should not ever speak of, as it is a superstition of ours that if you speak of them, they will show. These destroyers of entire species are not something to be trifled with, nor would we want to. But we needed something, anything, to bring any type of halt to their advance. Any way to slow them down even so that we could rally our forces. But we needed enough. We needed enough personnel and ships to fight them back. But the issue was, we are not designed for fighting. But we know someone who is. When we first fully approached the humans, this took many of them by surprise, although not as many as we would think. It seemed as though there was a certain cabal that was trying to keep our existence secret, but they had entered into their information age, and keeping secrets like this are pretty much impossible. As we found out, those who tried to stay in charge were bringing something called disinformation. And this disinformation campaign made many people deny our existence. However, eventually, when they saw us, when they saw our ships, and they saw us approach their leaders in good faith, all realized that this was true, and this was the way the world, the universe, the galaxies, all of them worked. It was in very short order that humanity began to listen to us and began to integrate our technologies. Along with that, many of their own technologies jumped several generations ahead by their own understanding. Within only a few of their decades, entire swaths of their population had stabilized. Much of the pollution was gone. Their idea of what was known as poverty was almost non-existent. It was absolutely amazing how fast they adapted in such a short time, but this was not why we were here. We informed them that they would need to show up and show us some sort of gratitude for our increase of their technology. They needed to aid us to stop the darkness from taking us. The humans called it the nothing. They all looked at each other strangely with this. The nothing. What is the nothing? I asked. I found out it was a reference to an old story way back in the day, a story that did not seem to ever end, but it was apt to it, as once this nothing showed up, you could not retrieve anything from it. Sending ships in to try and get your people out or any of your technology was a waste, as the nothing would swallow it up and not even give you the respect of a hail, but simply destroy you. With this, the humans realized what was going on and immediately got to work. Their efficiency was beginning to show as they began to create weapons, armor, vessels, and vehicles that were absolutely designed for war. They originally brought out something called a tank. No, let me check my notes. No, it was a tank. And this armored piece of machinery, though seemingly antiquated compared to everything we have, seemed to work just fine. It would be something else if they could at least get it on the planet. They might be able to fight the nothing back. They might be able to hold the line. We simply wondered if this could be the case. We did wonder. And we would not have to wonder for very long, as the first group of volunteers, 30 million strong, boarded our ships to get ready for the front lines. We brought them to Yanakti 4, a garden world that was not yet damaged by any sort of technology. It was considered just shy of a paradise world. And this is where the humans decided to make the stand. Their leaders had analyzed the movements of the nothing, and the nothing would head towards this sector next. And as they landed on the fourth planet, they immediately got to work, setting up all sorts of bunkers and digging into the planet so deep it was amazing. They brought different machines to bore into the rock so deep that even our strongest ordnance, aside from an actual planet cracker, could get into it. And even that, you would need several planet crackers to destroy it outright. It was insane. We started to wonder how they had not come up with this technology before, and when asked, they simply laughed, as this was considered, as they called it, old hat. We were confused, and what does an old head covering have to do with something? No, they reminded us, it was simply something they had done for a long time. Dig in and dig in deep. We understood this as the only time we ever had any survivors from the nothing were those that hid themselves in caves and had to bolt out as fast as they could on rockets that were designed specifically for speed and nothing else. No defenses, no offensive weapons, but simply speed to get them out. And this was the only time, in fact, there was only 4 times this ever happened, and only 6 survivors out of that 4. They all brought in horror stories, and many of them were catatonic by the time they reached us. And more than half of those that rode on the rockets did not survive, as the forces required to actually break through the atmosphere at speeds fast enough to get away would crush most of us, no matter what we did. It was horrible. But as the humans dug in, they kept receiving reports how close the nothing had gotten. They had taken the 10th planet in this sector and were beginning to move forward, and this seemed to make the humans move faster. More ships were brought in with more equipment. They began to dig in even deeper, even more, building massive complexes with walls that were several dozen meters thick, lined with several different layers of different materials, some of which they pulled straight from the land they were digging up. Giant smelting plants were brought in to build even more weapons. They had massive cannons on the surface of the planet, but they didn't have anything in orbit. It would take a long time for the humans to design and build their own ships, and our ships were not strong enough. We told them we would not be able to protect them if the nothing comes down for them, and they simply looked at us and said, "So we're going to be surrounded?" "Yes, that is what is going to happen." "Good. That means we can attack in any direction." Humans are insane. But willing cannon fodder is what we need to delay the nothing more, so we can try to get defenses that will slow them down, if not stop them. Now that we've been fully discovered, these are our final hopes. anything to make sure that they are stopped, anything to make sure whatever the nothing is, whatever controls it, is held back. Ninth planet, eighth planet, seventh planet taken, and it was soon going to be their turn. The humans began to completely transform this world from a garden world into a fortress. Every single corridor was mined. It was a trap. Everything, any type of infrastructure was sabotaged, rigged to explode. The humans did not care about any type of honor, any type of code. The only thing they cared about was winning. And as the enemy got closer, the jovial attitude that they had, even though they worked efficiently, was simply fading away, replaced by something I can only understand as vitriol. The look in their eyes was that of sheer determination, and it was scary. And as they finally reached the fifth planet, I told them that our ships would have to leave, as they would not be able to maintain the nothing. They would not be able to fight anything off. We knew there were ships inside of this group that was coming, but we did not know anything more than our ships were quickly dispatched when they faced them. One of the young humans actually looked over and tapped his hand on the ship. Yeah, 'cause your ships are made of paper. They are not. They are made of carbon composite. Yeah, that's extremely thin. I don't care what type of nanomachines you juice this thing up with. It's a toy. We didn't understand that, nor did we care. We simply boarded our ships and bid the humans adieu. As we left, we saw them continuing to work. We saw them getting all their armored vehicles covered up so they wouldn't be seen or sensed from space. We realized that what this was what the humans call an old-fashioned ambush. They would wait for the nothing to surround the planet and then assault in every direction at the same time. If they caused enough casualties, they could force the opposing forces to back away. The humans, I knew, were willing to throw away lives as they reproduce at far greater rates than we do. But could they truly respond? Could they truly fight back from losses of this many? 30 million had grown another 10 million across the entire surface. They had vehicles, fighters, all sorts of handheld weaponry. Everything was ready. But as we saw the fleet of nothing coming towards them, we simply held a silent prayer. We believed the humans did not have the ability to fight off this many, not for long. And as we watched the entire planet get surrounded, we saw shuttles going down. At least we figured they were shuttles. They honestly looked like bio waste, really. It was strange the way it was designed. We didn't understand it fully. But then, without warning, we saw streaks of light coming up from the planet. Somehow, the humans had used our technology and linked in with the gravimetric field of the planet itself and had set up several dozen of their own anti-ship cannons, and these streaked across the sky, cutting every ship apart that it touched. Even a grazing wound across the side of the ship was enough to melt off the plating, and it immediately vented atmosphere and fell to the planet's surface. Many of the ships couldn't even take a grazing hit. There was just so many. And for hours, lights continued to streak across the skies. They would turn on and streak across, waving around in a strange sort of pattern, and then they would shut off and another one would immediately take its place and continue to streak. The enemy began to fire down towards the planet, and you could see return fire coming, hitting much of the ordnance as it came down. This was insane. The shuttles that had gone down were almost completely unmolested until they reached the base of the planet. Once they reached the surface, they were immediately fired upon by all sorts of ordnance. We brought in our viewer screens as close as we possibly could, and we could see that those metal behemoths, those ancient pieces of technology, were simply rolling out of bunkers and firing like crazy. They would fire, smoke would roll out of the front of the barrel, it would turn and fire again, and then fire again, and then fire again. It was seemingly firing ballistic weapons, but it didn't seem to run out of ammunition. It was incredible, and as it came up on a whole bunch of foot soldiers from the nothing, they fired at it with this strange type of energy weapon. We figured it was plasma as it seemed to burn the hull. The behemoth simply turned and fired a smaller weapon full of ballistic ammo. It fired in rapid succession and began to cut through them like they weren't even there. The suits that the nothing soldiers wore were torn asunder as they began to fall, and they didn't just fall in one heap. No, they fell in pieces. Many of them having their limbs blown off, their heads taken clean off of their shoulders. These what seemingly type of insectoid races, they had 4 legs and 6 arms. It was odd to look at, but they all fell to pieces just the same. As the metal behemoths began to take more and more fire, they seemed to start running out of ammunition as they would immediately turn and head back towards their bunkers, constantly being harassed by fighters coming down, but the humans had sent fighters up themselves. Immediately, not only that, but ground fire of missiles, as they call them, started coming across, along with what they call triple A? Whatever it was a whole bunch of ballistic ammunition just sprayed into the air. The nothing fighters, though powerful, were not very nimble at all. The human fighters that were able to lift off were seemingly unseen by the sensors and would be able to not only take off vertically, but they could land vertically as well. They didn't even need the runways that were constructed. They simply took off and were unseen as they went behind the nothing fighters and just blasted them apart with their cannons. They fired missile after missile out of their belly as they began to spray the area. Other fighters took flight, needing the runways. As they went up, they immediately started firing their missiles into the fighters and starting to blast them with the cannons. Many of these got a whole bunch of return fire as they were not as stealthy as the original ones that went up. But since there was far less of the enemy fighters, they were able to, fight their way through. Eventually, once running out of ordnance, they would return as fast as they could. As soon as they landed, another one would take its place, the humans seemingly never to stop. It seemed as though they were burning through materials so fast. How could they keep this up? While all this was going on, the dance of light across the sky never stopped. And on the surface, what was a garden world was now being pockmarked as many ships were crashing into the surface, many of the fighters having to try and dodge the nothing fighters since they weren't nimble, many of them being taken down by their own ships plummeting through the atmosphere. Other ships, as these big, massive ships would come through and explode sometimes as they tumbled through the atmosphere, would be knocked around. The fighters just could not handle the burst that came out. It seemed as though the humans were ready for this, as many of their fighters seemed to tumble and then simply recover and continue. The nothing fighters could not. Once they started to tumble, they could not recover. Many of them you could see ejecting up and trying desperately to reach back above the surface, above the atmosphere to rejoin their fleet, but many of them didn't realize that the gravity on this planet was very similar to Earth, and Earth gravity is very strong. Almost double our home planet. And with this, the humans continued. I looked back towards the surface, and even though the humans were losing several of their monstrous machines, other machines came out, others with smaller cannons that fired repeatedly. As they turned up, they fired other missiles out. They had smaller guns attached to it. They would open up the back, and many humans would flow out and just begin to take their weapons straight towards the enemy. Though they had to fire several times to get through the enemy's exosuits, the humans didn't seem to mind. They were extremely efficient at taking them down. This is the way the battle went for the first 4 hours. 4 hours the humans fought off the nothing fighters, the nothing soldiers, the nothing battle group that was in space as their energy weapons just seemed to dance across. The nothing battle group tried to back away, but the lasers were more than enough to reach all the way to the first lunar orbit. In fact, There are now nothing battleships on lunar orbit. The battleships had shown up. They did not believe that this planet could be held, so they seemingly forgot to bring their battleships. The battleships began to rain all sorts of fire onto the surface, but as they began to fire, all the energy weapons on the surface began to target the battleships themselves. As soon as the first battleship was torn asunder, cut to pieces by the energy weapons streaking across the sky, the other battleships tried desperately to fire even before they reached effective weapons range. This was not enough, as every single one was immediately targeted by the energy weapons, even though several of the energy weapons would either shut off due to overheat or simply be struck by ordnance and not be functional. This did not deter the humans at all. It did, however, give the nothing soldiers and drop units an opening. At one point, they tried to rush a portion of the third continent. The third largest continent in the southern hemisphere was simply flooded by nothing soldiers. And as the humans began to lose traction, they began to realize that they could not hold this area, as many of their forces were simply overwhelmed. As more and more of the nothing fighters showed up, the humans did not stop, though. They retreated, but they continued to fire. And eventually, we saw that all the human fleets, all the human ships, vessels, and personnel were simply evacuating the area. We believe this would be enough for the nothings to take them apart. Once they had a foothold on the planet, it would not be long before the nothing would be able to take the entire planet by rushing over with everything they have. But this would not be. A single massive explosion happened just over top of the Nothing's central command. This massive ball of light stretched for several dozen kilometers, and as we noted on our sensors, it actually shook the entire planet. And in that moment, anything not caught in the blast radius was immediately set ablaze. Nothing soldiers were shaking on the ground, all 10 of their limbs in the air, shaking as they were beginning to burn with several thousand degrees. They simply torched. Those that were still alive were barely able to move, as their bodies seemed to be incapable of handling any type of radiation. This was what I would find out is called a Zarbamba, the largest weapon that they had in their arsenal when we first discovered them. A weapon so powerful that they tested it one time and said, "Oh, hell no." Even their most dangerous leaders realized the futility of using a weapon like this. It would simply not only eradicate the population, but risk destabilizing the entire planet. The fact that they had not destroyed themselves at this point was something else. At this point, we believe that we might be able to bring in our own fleet and fire into the rest of the Nothing fleet. As the humans continued to keep them back, with ruthless efficiency, they were moving back across the planet, retaking areas that had previously been taken. Now, many of those that were entering the contaminated area were covered in massive metal exosuits, many of them being barely able to move in their clunky, kind of staggered way of moving their legs back and forth. Those inside the metal machines didn't seem to even bother, as they rolled straight in and began to take apart the survivors. Any stragglers were immediately taken down. One or two of the ships of the Nothing tried to lift off from the planet, and the fighters simply swooped in, firing their missiles from so far out that I don't think the transports even saw them. From beyond visual range, ordnance fired in, came streaking in, and dropped them right where they were in massive fireballs. This is when the Nothing must have realized that they were facing a significant force, as they brought in what the humans call a dreadnought. These are almost never, ever seen. The last time this was seen was when the video came out of the Ganashnitaba homeworld. The Ganashnitaba did not last very long, as this ship was designed specifically to take down planets. With this, the energy weapons began to fire like mad at it as soon as it got close enough, yet it was able to take most of the hits. We could see a few of the weapons were burned and or cut off, but the thickness of the hull was enough to keep it from being totally destroyed. The humans must have realized this as they focused every single one of their energy weapons and ballistic weapons that could reach up towards it and began to fire. To their dismay, I'm sure. The dreadnought continued. Though it was damaged, it began to fire and began to take out entire swaths of a continent. Many of the humans immediately turned and ran back into their holes as they tried desperately to get out of the blast range of many of the ordnance coming down. Anything on the other side of the planet was still firing up, taking down more of the nothing enemies. It was just extreme chaos. On one side of the planet, you had humans able to hold back the nothing fleets. In fact, they were tearing them to ribbons and almost laughing at the idea of how simple it was. And on the other side of the planet, they were desperately trying to get into the planet itself to get some sort of protection from what was coming. It was blasting down, completely glassing the world. Any human caught out in the open, whether inside their metal machines or not, was completely and totally annihilated. I watched with horror as one of their more boxy machines did not take a direct hit, but the round landed very close. It was enough that the blast blew it off to the side, and it rolled after it flew through the air for at least 50 meters. But as it rolled, the inside simply exploded. The heat from the impact must have set off the ordnance. The only positive was that those inside did not suffer for very long at all, as the ordnance blew the entire machine to atoms. Again, as the dreadnought began to move its way over, as soon as it cleared the edge of the planet, as it continued its devastating move, more of the energy weapons and ordnance began to fire into it. It was getting to the point where I wondered if the dreadnought was going to be able to operate, as many pieces were being carved off of it and holes punched through it, but it continued with reckless abandonment. At least, that was until it got 2/3 across the planet. And as it cleared the equator, it realized that it faced not one, not two, not three, but 6 different energy cannons that seemed to focus their fire on one aspect of the ship. In fact, 2 of them had to hold their fire until the ship had cleared enough that it was in the range of the rest of them, and then fired straight through, running their beams so hot that we could see that one of them actually blew up. It had reached critical mass and exploded from all the heat that it was producing. The other ones continued to burn a hole through the ship and eventually carved clean through the dreadnought. And as they did, the dreadnought's inertia was still moving, and it began to cut into the dreadnought like a knife in the center of bread, and then pulled slowly down. It began to cut a perfect line through it. They must have hit the bridge, as the dreadnought did not change course, though the nothing ships are not known for their maneuverability, but strictly their power. Eventually, the line got towards the engine, and something happened to the engine where it didn't just explode. No, it imploded, sucking more than half of the ship into it, seemingly creating a micro black hole which dissipated within several seconds. But that several seconds was enough that a ship half the size of the local moon, at least the closest one, was gone. The rest of the ship tumbled through the atmosphere and simply crashed onto the planet, leaving a giant plume of dirt. With this, the Nothings must have believed that humanity was done. They sent down everything they could on the other side of the planet. They wanted to take this planet out. And as they landed, they began to nonchalantly leave their shuttles. Their fighters began to lumber about as though they did not have a care. They didn't seem to want to engage the humans, as they believed that the damage given to the other side of the planet was enough that the humans had been annihilated. Oh, how wrong they were. On seemingly one signal, a whole bunch of openings were blown open, not opened up manually, but exploded from inside the planet, reaching out. It was enough that the fighters, though almost in orbit themselves, could see the blast. They were confused. What was this? And then a whole bunch of metal machines, not only those on tracks, but also using our technology to hover using gravimetrics, and also those on simple wheels, came rolling out in 20, 30, 40, 50, hundreds of them everywhere began to go across with reckless abandonment. Some of these ones on wheels simply had a human sticking out the top with a single weapon system, but we would find out this one weapon system was more than enough, as it held down what they call the butterfly, which was strange. Why would they hold down an insect? And then we could see the flashes, the constant flashes. But as we saw and looked to see where the ballistics were hitting, nothing survived. The armor that was down on the ground from the nothing was punched full of holes. The infantry that was on the ground was immediately torn to pieces and sent up in strange orange mist. Those vessels that were on the ground that were still offloading were punched full of holes, focused on the cockpit and on the engines, as though the engines shut down because they could not be used. But if the cockpit was blown to pieces, it wouldn't matter what was done with the engines. The humans efficiently went across, and with unrelenting abandonment, seemingly beyond rage, as they not only took down the enemy, but they made sure that there was no survivors. Not one. The nothing didn't ever surrender. Those that were wounded tried to fight back, and humans could take them prisoner as they wanted, but one of them simply walked up to it, as this nothing soldier was missing an arm. Actually, all the arms on one side, and all four of its legs, as it was crawling towards its weapon. The human, looming over it, being only about 2 centimeters taller, if they were standing next to each other, walked up, looked at it as the nothing soldier seemed to growl at it. He reached up on his weapon on the central section, pulled his hand back down towards his first one, and then pushed it back forward. Then simply moved this weapon, we would know later as a shotgun, towards the nothing soldier's face. And from a distance we saw the nothing soldier's head vaporize. These humans are scary. As we continue to watch the carnage down on the planet, we realized that more of our fleet had shown up. We tried to radio in to the humans to let them know we were coming, but they never responded. We assumed that their communications had been hit. And as we started to move in, we saw something that terrified us beyond all reason. 2 more dreadnoughts had shown up. 2 of them. It was hard enough to take down one of these things, and now there was 2. With that, they began to fire back down on the planet. The humans again tried to run for their holes, but these dreadnoughts were not wasting any time and fired directly onto the holes that had been opened up. The humans caught outside. Many of them tried to dig in as fast as they could. If they found a hole, they simply dove in, not waiting for any sort of permission. Many of the mechanical beasts drove themselves straight back into the holes as the land exploded behind them as shots were being fired. It was a slaughter. At least we thought so. It was at this point we realized that the dreadnoughts had split up and they were going to go from opposite sides, one across the northern pole, one across the southern pole, and they were most likely going to meet in the center. They believed that the North and South Pole were the least likely for the humans to be, as it was extremely cold and no species survived in that sort of temperature. As they both went across, they both realized they were wrong. A central cannon had been set up on either side, something we did not know the humans were doing. They had set it up so they could use the magnetosphere of the planet as a power source along with the planet itself. The physics even confuse me. These humans are insane. But the cannons, though they didn't seem to move, simply fired straight up, one right after the other, and immediately pierced through the dreadnoughts. This time they wouldn't aim for the center, but they aimed for the bow of the ship. And as the ship drifted forward, it tried desperately to turn, so it was not a direct cut. One of them lost more than 35% of the ship, but it did lose its bridge, which meant it was out of control and was going to crash on the planet. The other one was hit directly on the nose and drifted right through the beam, making an absolutely perfect cut down the center. We watched, and we realized that the humans could not do this twice, as we could see the glowing inside of each the northern and southern poles, and then a sudden burst came out of them. This was not steam. They had put too much through these energy weapons, and now they weren't useful at all. But they had taken down not only an entire battle group, an entire support fleet had fallen to the humans, and now 3 dreadnoughts were gone. We looked at each other with confusion. We wondered how a species like this could possibly be contained now that we have let them loose. Would they be even more dangerous than the Nothing? Would they become the new warlords? Would they start taking over entire sectors? And would they try and take the entire universe the way the Nothing did? We worried because we saw how dangerous these humans were. Efficiently, they had destroyed all of these vessels, all of these ground units, and they had even taken things out in space. It was absolute insanity. Though the planet would not be habitable for many, many decades due to the fact that too much had fallen on it. The dreadnoughts themselves had made such a big mess that there was now a dust cloud on top of the planet. And through our sensors we could tell that the temperature of the planet was already beginning to plummet. The humans didn't seem to mind. We finally received communications, and when we did, we saw that many of them were wearing heavy garments. These heavy garments seemed to be all they needed to deal with the cold temperatures. It was insane. Commander, are you in need of assistance? Yeah, he said. How about you get your small gray asses over here and start picking up a few of our wounded? How about that? The sarcasm was not lost on anyone, and our fleet immediately began moving. Immediately moved to the planet, which had now been for the first time abandoned by the Nothing. Losing 3 dreadnoughts was beyond morale crushing for them. Not only that, our latest estimates was over 8.9 billion enemy had been taken down. Even an insectoid race like them could not recover from losses like this very easily. Though we believed that they had queens and whatnot, we didn't believe that they could possibly produce offspring that fast. Though we did not want to take anything to chance, we simply did not have the fleet to take a shot at the Nothings. The Nothings themselves seemed to withdraw not only from the 4th planet, but from the 5th, and the 6th, and the 7th. Why were they retreating? They shouldn't retreat off planets that we have not defended. 8th planet, 9th planet. And before we realized it, they had withdrawn from this system altogether. This entire sector was clear. Why would they simply pull back? Our fleet went and retrieved their wounded, and with our own medical technology, along with much of the humans' technology, we were able to save almost all of those that were still intact, at least mostly. It would take a while to regrow limbs, and of course it would take a long time for them to be able to manipulate these. But now that the humans were able to work with the new technologies that were finally released to them, not only from us, but from those that had restricted it from us, they were able to do all sorts of amazing things. We realized that with just a few decades, they would be able to recuperate their losses and do this again. The nothing would not know what hit them. And as we brought the wounded back to their home planet of Earth, there was cheers as they had already received word of what had happened. The humans had won. The humans had fought them off using a world that was designed for agriculture as a fortress world. The world itself was renamed. It was renamed Thermopylae. I did not fully understand this, but it sounded more like a word we would use, as the slang itself actually means something completely different. In our language, it means driftwood. But we didn't have time to worry about that. As we came back into the human sector, we saw something that actually petrified us. Just outside of their lunar orbit, we saw stations building ships, but not our ships. These were human ships, and these were not small ships at all. These were massive. They would be about a quarter the size of the dreadnought. But as we got closer, our sensors began to ping off something that was closer to their fourth planet. They were beginning to pull minerals from their asteroid belt and their fourth planet. And as we looked over, our sensors picked up something else. That wasn't a moon. That was a construction zone. That was a shipyard. That was oh crap. The humans were building their own dreadnoughts. And as we landed, we asked, well, when would it be ready? And the response we got was, oh, this one? What do you mean this one? There's more? Oh, yeah. We sent one straight into their territory. Oh, they've been fucking things up in there. Woo, boy. They just, wow. You want to see the video? As we went to see the video, we realized that when he said they were doing stuff to them as they were mating them towards the sky, something's wrong with my translator on that one. But as they were mating them towards the sky, they were completely destroying not only the enemy shipyards, but their ships. They had taken dreadnoughts out with single shots of a strange type of weapon they called a coil gun. It seems as though the enemy dreadnoughts would want to simply absorb the fire from this. They weren't mobile at all. It was amazing that one of them could even turn while being hit. But because of this, they were static targets. And humans have a phrase about static targets. Static defenses are the graveyards of armies. We realized this very quickly as we saw their first dreadnought not only take out another one of the enemies, but then went to the planet and simply glassed the planet in the matter of 4 hours. 4 hours to make an entire planet uninhabitable. And as they did, they found something. They found a colony. But this colony was different. As they scanned the planet, they realized that this had a queen's chamber. And with that, they turned the ship itself and charged up all 4 of its main batteries. These batteries all were massive coil guns, all of them firing a projectile that was approximately 10 meters across and almost a half a kilometer long. Are they serious? They fired all 4 almost simultaneously into the planet itself and watched on their senses as not only one of them pierced right through the center of the hive, but all 4 of them had caused the hive to collapse in on itself. The humans simply responded with one word as the video showed the captain turn towards his crew and go, "Squish." We realized that they had taken down a queen. And looking at the timeline, we realized this is why the Nothing had withdrawn. They were trying to reinforce their lines. They were taking all of those from the outskirts of their territory, and they were trying to reinforce their defense lines. Now they had a new enemy. They had A new enemy of extremely efficient killers. So efficient, in fact, that in the course of just a few of their solar cycles had taken the war not to stop the enemy, but had pushed into the enemy's territory. And the nothing was now in risk of becoming nothing. The human next to me simply reached out with his hand and tapped me on the back of the shoulder, trying desperately not to be too hard because he knew that we were frail compared to them, and stated, "Don't worry your big bulbous head, buddy. We got you covered." I looked up at the human, and he seemed to have that strange predatory, I think they call it a smile on his face. This worried me a bit, but I realized this was not in any type of malice. But as we would watch for the next few months, we saw that the humans had efficiently assembled their fleet and were going to take the battle straight towards the Nothing's homeworld. That is, if they can find it. But when they do, they'll make sure that nobody, and I mean nobody, messes with their friends ever again. I was actually surprised, though, when a human turned and said, "So, we know about you guys. Anybody else want to become friends with humans?" I worried if anybody would want to become friends with a species full of efficient killers.